Awesome. Thank you so much, Desiree, for getting us all together. Hello, everyone. This is the RPG World Building Workshop. My name is Banana, and I'm going to hand it off actually to the other people who are facilitating this with me. So, first person we're going to talk about is Clio. Clio, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yeah, hi everyone. I'm Clio Yunsu Davis. And yeah, I write and design tabletop RPGs as well as LARPs and interactive fiction, but obviously today we're focusing mostly on RPGs. And I've worked on a few projects like Kids on Bikes, Teens in Space, Mutants and Masterminds, Flip Tales, most recently Magical Kitty Save the Day, and a few other forthcoming projects that I'm really excited about. But yeah, that's my whole deal.
Awesome, thanks. And the other person that we have here with us is Sen-Foong Lim. Um,
So,
we have a bio up for you as well, I think. So
sure.
tell us about some stuff that you've done.
I've done lots of stuff. So I'm primarily known as a board game designer. I was a designer of co-designer of Junkard and Belfort and Akrotiri and Kingdom Rush and Batman the animated series and all sorts of stuff. But I also my first love was RPGs. And so I've recently reintegrated myself into the RPG writing world and um, have done work on Kids on Bikes, Kids in Space, all sorts of things like that. Never Going Home, Gears of Defiance. And then recently, I think our most recent thing that's coming up soon from Banana Chan and myself is called Jiangxi Blood of the Banquet Hall, which is a game that we're publishing coming to Kickstarter someday soon. And that's about intergenerational Chinese families running a restaurant while fighting vampires. So that's a fun one that we've got coming out soon. What about you, Banana?
Awesome. So my name is Banana Chan, and I'm one of the owners and co-founders of a small box board game publishing company called Game in a Curry. And we also now publish RPGs because of Jiangxi Blood in the Banquet Hall. So aside from that, I've also written stuff for 7C Kitai, Kids on Bikes, North Sea Epilogues, and Dune the RPG. So that's some of the stuff that I've done on the RPG side of things. And today we're going to be talking about building a world together.
Ooh.
So for the first question, before we start with anything, like where do you get your inspiration for making a world? Where do you begin?
Jump in on that if it's all
Yeah, go
right.
for it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So for me, it almost always starts with atmosphere, and kind of the mood of whatever game or story even that I'm trying to create. Because you can have a world that on paper might, if you just have the bare basic facts of the world, is largely identical in different games if you were just to write it out like, okay, it has these kinds of buildings, it's like inspired by these cultures. But where you're going to get a lot of the uniqueness there is the atmosphere of the game, the tension there, how players are going to feel while they're exploring that world. So that's kind of usually where I start. And a lot of the time, it's also very tied to music. Like I find the right music that feels right
Oh,
to
really?
it.
That's so
Yeah.
cool. I've definitely been musically influenced. I think like anytime I listen to like synthwave or stuff like that, it's like I need to make a cyberpunk game, of course.
Yeah.
But I'm 100% with you in terms of experience. I tend to look at RPG world building as relationships. So I think about it as relationships between the characters that people are playing and then the world in which they are playing those characters in. I see the world very systematically. I don't know whatever word I'm going to be using for that. Bioecologically is actually the theory that I would use psychologically to describe this, where systems are tied to systems and tied to systems, and they're bigger and bigger and bigger, but you're one element of it. And so when I world build, I think of it from a character person perspective, understanding that then I have to build it out into this big bioecological system. What about you, Banana?
Yeah, absolutely. So I usually take a lot of inspiration from movies and television. Most of the things that I work on, I always start theme first. I'm not very I think about mechanics later. So I start with a theme, start building out, all the ideas before getting into the big mechanics, the crunch. So yeah, and along, with all the other things that you said, sort of working in the same vein as that. So let's go on to the next slide, actually, which is the next question. And that is, how do you expand? So once you have your idea, once you have, something down on paper, how do you get into, the next parts of, say, an adventure or a game that you want to write out?
Shall I jump in first?
Yeah, go for it. Yeah.
We're going to go in the same cycle.
Yeah, we'll follow that.
And just to make sure, Banana, are we on the slideshow? Because I didn't hear you say to start the slideshow. So
sorry about that.
No, it's okay. My bad. So let me start it so people could hear you talking about it. They just couldn't see the slides. So
my bad.
No, you're totally fine.
Yeah.
So let me get to where you are. So where do you start?
Should be slide 6.
So it's the how do you expand?
Yes.
Okay, there we go.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Oh, yes.
This is very new.
I think for me, it's all come down to figuring out what the right questions to ask are. So often it's like I said, like it starts with atmosphere for a lot of my projects. And then from there, it comes to what characters are going to be experiencing this atmosphere. And then once you start to get kind of an idea of who you would want to be playing in, this very bare bones idea, just a very abstract idea of a world so far, you start asking questions like, okay, so like, where did they come from? How did they grow up? Like, what is their experience in this world? How do they interact with it? Do they have a job that makes their interactions with the world very interesting, or is it something completely different? And yeah, so it very much goes atmosphere, characters, which you might not think is the natural progression when you're talking about world building. But the actual details of the setting come third for me, because I feel like once I had the foundation of who is going to be exploring the world, then I can kind of better figure out what that world looks like.
Yeah, for me, when I'm looking at stuff, again, because I think systemically, the idea of conflict or what is the main problem that these characters in this specific world are figuring out or solving or fighting against. That's my main crux of the experience for most of the RPGs that I'm working on or making. And then from there, I build out the systems that they are fighting against. Like, so if I have a character that is going to be fighting against, racial oppression or something like that, so well, then what is causing that racial oppression in the game? And then I have to build the world around that. What does that look like? A world where, the corporate entities are fighting against, people that live in the gutter, and the characters are all people that live in the gutter. What does a world look like where that's happening? And what kind of clothes do people wear? It does create kind of this binary tension, which is not really the way the world works, but that's where I start from, is this very binary way of looking at things. And then as I introduce more systems, we start getting to see that, heroes can be anti-heroes, and the corporation might actually be doing some good. And that, because that's the real dilemma that you put characters in, is, what if this is a company that is doing bad for one thing, but really is actually doing good for other stuff? So I like character motivation. I like all that kind of stuff. So I usually build out the world based on that, less than the physicality of it. But I do have that in mind in terms of what does that look like and all those types of things. How do you expand, Banana?
Yeah, I think conflict is definitely something that I think about a lot as well. So starting from the conflicts between, the different peoples that are in this world, and sort of talking about like, how does that influence their culture? How does that influence like the different things that are going on in their lives? I think that's like an interesting thing to like look at when you're building out your world. So yeah, absolutely agree with everything that you're saying so far. I go like, I use the same sort of techniques in world building. So let's go on to the next question, which is the next slide. And that is, how do you leave enough room for the players to expand on the content? So when you're writing an adventure, usually, people do a lot of lore building and history building when it comes to these adventures. How do you make sure that when you're building something for players, they don't they stay within these guardrails, but they don't but it also gives you like room to play and explore and grow?
I'm gonna let somebody else go first this time.
Okay, I will go first. So, I am a very, very big proponent of co-created worlds. So, um, I don't think I was always like this because I've been playing. You can't tell by the face, but I've been playing role-playing games for 42 years. 42 years of role-playing under my belt, and so I started with Chainmail, which is the precursor to D&D. And we didn't really, we had everything kind of laid out for us in very, very many ways, source books for whatever, like Greyhawk and, whatever world you wanted, there was a source book for it eventually. But there was still room to create. And so I think nowadays in more modern gaming, it sounds really weird to say that, but in more modern gaming, I actually started off right from the beginning in terms of co-creating games. So for things like if you've played, Kids on Bikes when you're making the city up, that's exactly how I do things. I have some guardrails, like you said, Banana, where it's like, this is the world we're playing in. Here's a timeline. This is like, or we establish that as a group. Banana plays in one of my games. We used to be friends. And seriously, one of the most fun things was inventing the city that we played in, which is where they decided that, this city, we're taking it into like the 90s era, and it's a coastal Californian town where Desiree might have grown up, I don't know. And it was this city where there were two factions, and like one of them is like a makeup company called Eternal Youth, and all these types of things that I, as the game GM and the world builder, didn't do almost anything. The players all came up with that. So to me, it has to do with asking a lot of good questions. If you've ever played Dread, which is one of my favorite RPGs ever because it's so easy to do, character creation isn't rolling dice. It's literally answering questions. And the funny thing about it is that in answering those questions, you will probably have a better idea of who your character is than by numerical stats, because you will have motivation, you'll have relationships with the world and with other characters through answering those questions if they're formulated well. And so that is kind of how I do it, is through asking questions. The other thing, and it goes to the bottom point on the slide of start local, think global, is as a world builder, I leave the edges of the world frayed. Like I don't even bother with them. Like, why am I going to bother with creating all this stuff that's out here when we haven't even explored what's in the center yet? And I give the characters not necessarily the power to do that, but through playing the game here in the center here, what the characters do here then affect how I later build the world out here if they need to go explore those regions, right? So oftentimes I give narrative authority to the players while we're playing the game and say, okay, there's a company that is doing this. What's the name of that company? And they'll go, I don't know. And they'll say, McCormick Industries. Okay, great. I write that down and that becomes part of the world. And now later on, maybe I'll have a whole thing about McCormick Industries being this, totalitarian company that is trying to, infect the world through nanobots, not Bill Gates, right? So anyways, that's kind of how I do it. What about you? Are we going to go with Clio?
Yeah, let's go with Clio.
Yeah.
How about you, Clio?
Yeah, I agree with a lot of that, because I think one of the most important things about making sure that the world feels shared and that every player is like very invested in it is that co-creative aspect. And for me, what that generally looks like is trying to be very intentional about blank spaces in the game. And that can take the form of, there's this part of the map that hints that there's something else over there, but we're not saying what that is. We're maybe like poking a few little, putting some clues there as to what you might populate that world with, but we're not writing that out for you. And then also one thing I like about Kids on Bikes is all the questions that you ask the players kind of at the beginning of the game, of not just in relationship building, but in kind of the town creation. So I have an adventure setting in Strange Adventures Volume 2. Yes, 2. Called No Such Place as Koreatown. And one of the questions that gets asked of the players is like, okay, so like what's a rumor that you've heard about the town that's like going on right now? And a lot of people, that's a pretty safe question to go with, because people will be able to find out, they'll be able to come up with something for that. And it can go in like wildly different directions. And so it's hard sometimes to come up with questions that do find the really good balance of, this is specific enough to, you know, this world or the mood we're going for, that it's definitely going to generate content that the players are going to be interested in, but also it's broad enough that it's you want leading questions that are not so leading that you're basically feeding them the answer, right? So that's also really fun as a world builder to do, is to figure out what those questions are that are going to get players really excited about the answers they come up with. What about you, Banana?
Yeah, I think that's it's like a cool way to also set the tone for the game too, right? Having that sort of, you know, question and answer session in the very beginning, you know, during your session 0, when you're like asking each other questions, that also helps with setting expectations and seeing what the players want. That way, you know, if there is a GM, then the GM can take it a certain way and go down a path that's more interesting for the players. Mm-hmm. So I think that's, yeah, absolutely. That's like you know, ad libs or like question answer type format is great to work with when writing out adventures or making worlds.
And I guess just to keep on this point for a couple seconds, is that this is like in session stuff. So obviously, as writers, we build worlds before a session ever starts. And part of our job as world building and writing is to provide a list of questions for GMs to start with that they can ask and maybe they can expand on. So, I mean, even in, I think, some of my games, it'll be like, here's a couple questions that you can start out asking your players about to see what they'd like to do. So a lot of tools in modern role-playing games, story gaming, whatever you want to call it, they have a lot of, not hand-holding, but ideas to give the GM a list of things that they can do to help the players have agency over not just their characters, but the world itself. And I find that when characters create the world, wow, did they ever want to play in it? Right? They want to see, where's that going to come in? I said this word at one time. It's got to come back. Oh, there it is. Look how they weaved it in. That's amazing, right? So super fun. Yeah, definitely. And it does drive up engagement. Like, people are more interested in playing things that they've created. So yes, absolutely. So on to the next slide, which is questions to ask yourself when building a world. So when you were talking about, Sen, when you were talking about building the world for, or making like this place for us to play in for We Used to Be Friends, what were some things that you started off with when you were, you know, asking the players, you know, when you were thinking about this world yourself? Oh, cool. Let me actually just see if I can actually pull up the questions from We Used to Be Friends. I have the ash can here somewhere. Yeah, it is right there. So in a game like We Used to Be Friends, which is made by Jonathan Lavallee, it's only in, unfortunately, ashcan format right now. He's working on making it a real deal thing at some point. But it's basically Veronica Mars, right? So it's paying tribute, a very big love letter to Veronica Mars. And that's the type of thing that you go into it knowing. So the world that is built before the characters or the players build it themselves is the setting, the high level setting of, you're all like teenagers or college age students who are in a place where that there's an abundance of mystery, right? And you may be friends, you may used to have been friends, you might not be friends now, but you might become friends later. So it's all about the city you're in and the relationship that you have to those places. So in building the city, I'm just going to read from Jonathan's rulebook right now, is the first step is building the city is you have to figure out who has things, like who has, and you choose two things. Do they have technology, entertainment, old money, or real estate? Those seem to be the driving factors in wealth, right? And then you're going to choose who are the have-nots and what is the reason in this specific city that you're playing in why there is not a lot of wealth going on. Is it because there's only one major employer? Is it because there's only like really crappy jobs available? Is it because people have lots of debt? Or is it because there are lots of vets here? And so Jonathan was making a very specific statement in this game. And then who is important in the neighborhood and why are they important? And then who knows each other in this neighborhood? So what do you call the people that live in the poor area? What do you call that area of the city, right? And in the game that Banana plays with me, it's called the tracks for many reasons, right? The wrong side of the tracks, and then because it's a pharmaceutical-based city, you know, the tracks are maybe drug-related. What do you call the rich people? They're on a hill. They're actually, it's called the hills, but it's not actually a hill. It's a flat area by the beach, but it's called the hills because they look down on the people from that hill, right? So just really interesting stuff here. And each character playbook in this type of game is a Apocalypse World Hack, gets a different question to answer that is really actually quite relevant to who their character is. So because it's a detective type story, like a delinquent would get to answer the question about the high school, where do people go to avoid the teachers? Whereas the socialite, who is like the really popular kid, might get to answer the question, you know, how do the rich popular kids differentiate themselves from the poor unpopular kids, right? So it's a really neat way of doing things. And then you name it and your city's done. But just by going through like maybe an hour's worth of question and answer, you get this rich, vibrant city that has places, names, and people in it without doing a lot of work ahead of time, all set on the predicate kind of high level thing that you're in high school, you live in a city, there are problems there, and then what are those problems? And so this is a very easy way to world build as well. You don't have to do a lot of the lore and world building ahead of time. I do that as well, but a lot of games you don't have to, and that's okay. I think part of the problem we have is that a lot of people, especially for the Renegade games, the ones that are coming out like Kids on Bikes and whatnot, it's a lot of people who are transitioning maybe from board gaming to role-playing games have said, I've always heard about this role-playing stuff, never really played, love to do it. They pick a game from a company they trust and value like Renegade because they like their board games. But then they get into a system where I don't know what to do because there's no real world built, which is why we created a whole bunch of adventure hooks. Like all of us have created like 2 or 3 adventure hooks each for that system, for Jonathan and Doug's system. So we're trying to give you guys that. And our next project for Kids on Bikes will be even a little bit more on the point in terms of you don't need to do any of that yet. We'll help you through all of that.
Awesome.
So yeah, questions are important.
On like a writing side of world building, Clio, you mentioned your scenario for Kids on Bikes. So what are some questions that you built into your scenario that that allows the GM, sort of like, you know, what Sen was saying, that allows the GM to take these nuggets and like, you know, place them into their own world with their players?
Well, one of the questions that, and I think generally it's kind of one of the last questions on the list because it's kind of a nice punctuation point. And just for a little bit of context, my No Such Place as Koreatown takes place in like late 90s, Northern Virginia, Koreatown, based largely on like Annandale, Virginia. And it's not always like a very heavy theme in the game, but kind of part of the backdrop is that there is tension between like the white residents of the fictional Annandale is Fairdale in this one, and who are kind of like, why are all these Korean immigrants here, like setting up all these businesses, and then the Korean community that is living there. And so the last question that gets asked is, okay, so what is the last Korean establishment on the border of where Korean Fairdale turns into like the other part of Fairdale? And that I like a lot of questions that refer to a map, because I like drawing maps, even if it's not like officially part of a game. It's fun to do, and you can usually come up with something. Like, I am terrible at any kind of drawing, but it's something that is it helps to see something kind of in front of you a lot of the time. And when you're referring to locations during this kind of session 0 time, it will make players want to visit those places once you kind of get going, because they remember, if they have some hand in why it's important, or like creating a history there, then they feel a lot more invested. And I'd also, kind of in general, the way I like to look at what questions are important to ask, I like to think of it as kind of, okay, you have the distant past when you're looking at the history of a location, and then you have the more recent past. And then you also have kind of, again, we were talking about start local, think global. You have like maybe world events, or, just town events if it's kind of a smaller scale, or galactic events if you're talking about teens in space, right? Like events that have affected a bunch of people on a really big scale. And then you have things that are like much smaller, things that maybe just affected these characters' families, or even just them, like their interior life, something that seemed really important to them, but maybe wouldn't to anyone else. And then finding ways to connect those so that the connection isn't super direct and obvious, but you can see how the overall history and the overall like kind of events of this place have had an impact, maybe psychologically, or maybe a little bit more concretely on the players or the player characters.
Great. Yeah, and I can talk a bit about actually and these are awesome points. I can talk about the way that some people approach writing. So if you were, say, writing a world for a company, and you're asked or tasked to do a bit of world building yourself to make the lore up for an existing IP or like a new IP altogether, then some questions that you might want to ask are, what is the place? So what is the period, location, what are the historical events that have shaped the town or the world that you're working with? And what is the setting? And these are two different things, because with the setting, it's more along the lines of what are the conflicts? What are, the different things that are happening with the people? So before we get into even more nitty-gritty stuff, because that is actually going to be a part of our world building workshop, let's go on to the next slide and talk about building a world.
Can I just interject
go
one
ahead.
point?
Yes.
Actually, two
Of
points.
course. Yeah.
If you are a novice world builder and you kind of want to do it, but want to do it in a structured format, play Microscope or The Quiet Year, and just play it, and then write down everything that happens during the game, and bam, you've got a world. I just played The Quiet Year last night with Jeff Schaubel and John Gilmore, Kids on Bikes, and we made an awesome world in like a couple hours, where it has history and there's events, like Clio was saying, events that are historical, that predicate how the characters today might think and feel about different personages and places in the world that exists now. History is actually a really, really important thing. 18-year-old me would have never said that because I hated history, but 48-year-old me is saying that history is really important. And a world that has history has depth. And even just asking a few questions about the history of a world or place, a city, whatever, is really, really important to give that gravitas to the decisions that characters are making. It helps people immerse a lot more. Anyways, Microscope, The Quiet Year, play them.
Those are great games. Absolutely. So let's actually get into building a world. So on the next slide, which is let's build a world, let's pretend that we are actually writing a world for a company like Renegade, and they are giving us some constraints. With these constraints that we have to keep in mind, we're going to build something around it. So I always like to say that constraints make for more creativity, more creative, writing, or any sort of art for that matter. So the constraints that we have here are that it is set in the sci-fi genre. There are horror themes. It is in the modern times, and one of the questions here is, how is technology and or magic treated, and what are the rules? And the last part of this is that this is for a small RPG that uses a pre-existing system, similar to Powered by the Apocalypse game, so Apocalypse World system. So what are some ideas that you're having so far based on just that?
So my immediate thing, because I love subgenres. Like I love reading just like lists that are just like, here are all the subgenres and like the sub-subgenres of these subgenres, because you get a lot of ideas that way, because you also think of like, how can I kind of break these down? How can I blend them? How can I break the norms? So we have here, the first thing is that it's a sci-fi genre, but then immediately following that, we have horror themes in modern times. So that will help us to define what that subgenre is. So we're not going to have, well, we might, but we probably won't have like intergalactic wars. And it's probably, if there's horror themes, I mean, it could be lighthearted, depending on like, you do that. But chances are we're going to be looking at some of the darker themes within sci-fi. And the things that immediately jump to mind for that are, and I won't go into like graphic detail here, but like, body horror is a thing that happens. If you think modern times and sci-fi, you kind of think cyberpunk is like near future, but you can also do a kind of Tales from the Loop type thing, right? Where it's like an alternative reality with more sci-fi elements involved. And those are kind of the immediate things that my brain starts popping up with. What about you two? Oh, Sen, you are audio off.
Yeah, I mean, totally. I was not as long as you're saying body horror, because that's where my brain went, especially in modern times. So sci-fi, horror, modern times, to me might be like hybridization of like alien human, might be bioethical considerations of things like cybernetics, all sorts of gene therapy. All these types of things are really interesting in terms of how horrible it can become, right? I think that there are a lot of things that would make for interesting worlds to play in. Something that I didn't mention before in terms of influences, and Banana knows this because she works closely with me, is that I am super influenced by podcasts, and which this is reminding me, Banana, of like that one thing that we had talked about, where if there was a game based on the children who were born from the scientists who worked in the lab on the Manhattan Project. Right.
Yeah,
and that to me is like sci-fi, modern times, and then it could be potentially super horrific. Right. So that's kind of where I'm going with this one.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that it's important to have media touchstones so that you can sort of have like a tone that you can, or a pre-existing tone that you can work with. And yeah, I agree with, everything that you're saying. I'm thinking like, Black Mirror, or something that's like along the lines of, I don't know if all of you have seen Upgrade.
Not yet.
It is fantastic. So Upgrade, when I saw the trailer for that, I was thinking, oh, this is just Venom. The trailers look exactly the same, and the main character kind of looks alike, like in both the movies. So I got them confused. But when I saw Upgrade, it was completely not what I expected. It was really good. It's set sort of like before cyberpunk is the cyberpunk that we think of, with like, the tall neon buildings and like, everything's sort of set in this like weird dystopian sci-fi universe. For Upgrade, it's the precursor to that. So imagine maybe like 10 or 20 years before it becomes full-blown sci-fi. And it's got a lot of body horror in it as well. So
that's cool.
Yeah, absolutely.
And is that like a Netflix thing? Is it a movie thing?
Ooh, good. It's a movie, but let me find out where you can watch it.
Because now I want to watch it.
It's really good. It's got the same actor as the guy from The Invitation.
Okay.
I don't know if you've ever seen
I think you've mentioned this to me before, so I will go take a look for it.
One of my favorite Oh, sorry.
Oh, no, sorry. I was gonna say, while you're looking for the where to watch this, one exercise that I do that I thought might be useful for people at home.
Cool.
I say
Yes.
as if we're not all at home. Is that because if you have something like, if you have constraints like, okay, it's a sci-fi genre and we want it to have horror themes, then one thing that you could do, I keep a master list of a bunch of media touchstones that I feel very passionately about, things stemming back from like childhood, things that I was, daydreaming about as a kid and like basing terrible fan fiction on as a kid. And as I come across new movies, comic books, games, books, what have you, that really inspire me, I put them on a list, and it's a numbered list. So if I ever need to just like, okay, I want to write a short story, or I want to write like a short RPG, then I roll or I do like a random number generator because online, and
It's more
I
than
choose,
20. It's more than 20. Is what
it's
you're
more.
saying.
It's like 200, I think, at this point. But I would roll a d20 many times. But it'll give me two numbers, and I will just choose those two different like IPs basically, and blend them together to make whatever I need to make. And you can get some really funny combinations that way.
What'd you get?
I've gotten things like BioShock and Sailor Moon, and I did a grad school like project based on that.
Yes.
And it's
I'm
like,
down
so
for that.
yeah, so if
Yeah.
ever you're just like, I want to create a thing, but I don't know where to start, like I'm just totally stumped, that's a good place to start. And if you are tasked with creating something specifically with like constraints, like, okay, it needs a sci-fi genre, it needs horror themes, then you can make a list of like, okay, here are the things within the sci-fi genre that I'm really excited about, and here are some horror like movies, games, what have you, that I like really enjoy. And then you do the random number generator, and you choose just two things from those, and you just run with it.
No, that's great. That's a great idea.
That's
I can see like
wonderful.
lots of the meta tags on those. Say, this is the thing with sci-fi, horror, and this, and then it comes up in your little lists.
Yeah, my list is not very organized, sadly. It's very old school, but
Is that why you're
works.
building?
Hey,
Is that
yeah,
why you're
whatever
building your
works,
giant whiteboard?
Yeah, I wish I could keep it. Wouldn't all fit on my giant whiteboard that is in pieces behind me.
That's awesome. That's a great tip.
That's funny. Yeah, that's an awesome tip. So you can watch Upgrade on Prime, and I'm not sure if it comes with Prime or if you have to pay for it. So
Yeah, I hate that.
throwing that out there.
Yeah, and us Canadians, we have a totally different Netflix and Prime and everything from you.
Oh.
So who knows?
Oof.
Especially for non like things that are made by Netflix and things that are made by Amazon, those will be on those systems. But things that they license from other places, they may not have the rights for Canada or whatever. So Upgrade, I will look for it. I know it's on YouTube as well. So
Yeah, I think you have to pay for it though. So
Yeah.
yeah,
if it's
same
on a system
cost.
I already have, there you go.
Yeah.
Cool. So how do we think technology and or magic is treated, and what are the rules? Good question.
So if we're going for, oh, sorry, what were we saying?
Are we saying like body horror is the thing we're going for?
We're going for a body horror, like cyberpunk type world.
Are we doing cyberpunk or are we doing aliens? What do you want?
What do y'all think?
I'm good with either.
Yeah, me too.
I've been listening to a lot of synthwave, so let's say cyberpunk.
Me too.
Nice.
Okay, cyberpunk. Yay! I just played Tech Noir the other day, and
Ooh.
we ripped the heart out. Well, somebody ripped the heart out of somebody to sell the cybernetic heart that was a prototype. So kind of horrible. Let's talk about that.
That's some body horror. So if we're talking about technology on, of course, the immediate thing that comes to mind is like, okay, this technology is available widely.
Is it?
But like potentially, like the way I think about it, an interesting dynamic that could take place is that the technology in general is available widely, but maybe for it to actually like function the way it's supposed to, it's really, really expensive and just like completely inaccessible. But you have kind of like cheaper versions of it that are more dangerous.
Versions or like
Mhm.
jailbroken versions or black
Yeah.
market versions. Okay, cool.
Yeah.
Why is this bad? Why is this body modification bad? Or how does it turn into horror?
Is there a
Do you think-
sinister company involved? Usually there is sinister
Well, I mean,
corporations involved in these things.
Right. So like, is it something like, we have all this technology in us, but is it controlling us, or are we controlling it? Or does it like turn us into like these living bioweapons that can be, marshaled and weaponized against the company's enemies? What is this?
Yeah, maybe there's like a reason why there are jailbroken versions, because the non-jailbroken versions are probably run by like the sinister government that, you know, takes over your body and like, you know, makes it, you know, obey whatever their commands are or something like that.
Yeah.
Which
Yeah,
is
like
similar to Upgrade.
There is some interesting stuff to work with if you're talking about like maybe there's always a price to pay when it comes to getting these modifications, and maybe it's okay, you're not, if you can't pay the price but you really need or want this modification, then you have to like serve, you know, X corporation or X government for however amount of time, because they own the technology that is now in you.
Right. Yeah, there's some ownership of that, right? And I mean, today, Haley, we're just talking about Netflix and Prime. It's on a subscription service. So if you don't subscribe to it anymore, what's going to happen? Does that technology become inert? Or can you just not use it, but they can still like see through your eyes or whatever? That's creepy. That's horrific. I don't like that.
Yeah.
That's some Black Mirror stuff right there.
Yeah.
Right?
So let's move on to the next part, which is the next slide, which is let's build a world, which is, wait, that's still it's labeled the same thing. Sorry, it's labeled the same thing, but the question is what is the place?
Yeah, so where are we playing as players? So we know that the period is like maybe just a few years in the future from now, right? So 2050, something like that. So 30 years, so a generation away from today. What location are we in? Are we going to say, for the benefit of everybody, that, you know, it's like Anywheresville, North America? Or are we somewhere a little bit different than that? What's happened to the world in this time? So where do we think we're going to be in 30 years, like geopolitically?
Ooh. Like a fictionalized version of a place, or do we want to play with like a real place?
Yeah, exactly. I don't know.
Yeah, because I feel like everyone always jumps to, when it comes to cyberpunk, it's the same thing with like noir, right? You have LA, you have New York, and those are kind of the two main things. So I always think it's interesting to kind of step away, or you have Tokyo, right?
So what I'm going to do is I'm going to make a list of all the cities and roll 2 very big dice.
Ooh.
And mash up all the
What if it's like a suburban town? Or like
well, that's the thing, right? Like, why does it have to be
Yeah.
nitty gritty of like Neo Tokyo? Like, why is it like Iowa, somewhere in Iowa?
Cyberpunk Stardew Valley.
Well, we're not farming for anything. I never said anything about farming.
Just like Stardew Valley. But yeah, that's always an interesting, because a lot of times these like subgenres or tropes will be very strongly tied to a very, like, it's very specific location, and it looks aesthetically very much kind of like this one idea
Right.
that's been put in everyone's head.
And you mentioned Tales from the Loop, and that's why Tales from the Loop for me is so interesting, because of the visceral dichotomy between technology and like pastoral or just normal life, right? That's scarier than if mechs were in the middle of Neo Tokyo. I expect mechs in Neo Tokyo. I don't expect them in Ohio, right? So it's interesting.
It's sort of like that folk horror. I've been writing a lot about folk horror, but that folk horror.
Mothman.
Yeah. That like weird feeling when you see like Midsommar for the first time, or you see like any of these other movies that, or even like Wicker Man, where things are in this bright, beautiful, you know, rural area, but something's amiss. It's like there's this horror that's lurking beneath.
Is it horrible when we expect it? Right? That's a really good question. And is horror sometimes created by our mind when it is like cognitive dissonance? Is that's what horrible about it? Because I mean, body horror by itself is literally that. That's the idea behind the whole genre of body horror, is that we don't expect the body to look like that, to do that, to move like that. And so it's intrinsically horrible to us by human nature, right? So I don't I do martial arts, so as a lot of you know, and there are martial arts accidents where like people's limbs are broken backwards, right? So like their leg, like I see Desiree just like on the feet over there. But like if somebody, like if I do a low kick to your knee and I break it, it's actually gonna go backwards. And that's that, like when people see videos of that, it's like, that's horrific, because the body's not made to do that. But it doesn't have to be in this gritty kind of UFC environment. That happens anywhere. And so the same thing here is if we're doing body horror, does it have to happen in, I think it's actually more horrible if it happens in everyday life than in like New York. We assume New York's going to be horrible from all the stories, right? Which is again why, like, what's that? What's the robotic wife thingy? Stepford Wives type thing, right? Because it's so normal that it becomes horrible.
Oh, are you talking about Swallow? Oh, it's not Swallow, is it?
I don't know. Maybe my brain is kind of thinking at a mile a minute here, but I'll look it up.
Sorry, what were you gonna say, Clio?
What I was thinking about, because we were talking about like where do you not expect to see it, and that immediately made me think of, okay, what if we have just to start, because I'm going to always start pushing characters in kind of soon, is what if we have characters who have tried to kind of escape from all the horror out in the city, and so they used to live in one place, and now they're in this like a very small town that's like off I-95 or something, like a very small town in a rural area where people go to escape from the horrors.
Yeah. There's a very big percentage of the population who can like empathize with that, because everything's off I-95. Right? Or Route 66 or whatever, right?
Yeah.
There's a way to make this every man's problem or every person's problem.
Yeah.
Cool. So we'll say it's some town that's
let's say
off
it's
of I-95.
Yeah, we'll say it's somewhere in Pennsylvania, just because.
Nice.
That's somewhere in the middle.
Nice.
Okay.
And we're saying that the historical events that have shaped this world that we have, that we're building, are based off of basically like, the horrible things that are happening in the cities. That's why people are moving out.
Perhaps, yeah. Mm-hmm. But then there's still this notion of, people have technology embedded in them. And how did that happen historically, right? Was there a major medical breakthrough where we were able to stem off disease by implanting chips in people that regulated, neurochemicals or something like that, and everybody has them? Or what is this? And why is this happening? Have you seen the Broadway play off-Broadway play called Be More Chill? It's about putting this thing in your brain called a squib, which is this it's from Japan. That's the song. It's micro nanotechnology. Anyways, it makes you confident and better at everything. And the whole play is about, the musical is about, this thing that's in your brain, and that's what this makes me think of. So historical events that shape the world is maybe that technology has evolved to the point in the 30 years from now, where we are solving healthcare problems through the use of technology, but that makes, does that make us like thralls of the corporation? What does that do? Does it allow them to say like, hey, because we all know American healthcare system is not the best, but what happens if a corporation came in and said, hey, we're going to solve that problem you have by putting this chip in, and in return for that, we're data mining your life.
Ooh.
Right?
Yeah.
But then it gets even more horrible when we find out, what can this chip do to people? What does that actually allow people to do? They might have signed off on the data mining thing, but what else can this chip do? Because it allows a back door into that person's nervous system or their life or something like that, right? Interesting. Yeah. And by getting off the grid.
Yeah, I was just going to say, if getting off the grid, you're like literally leaving this area where they have an eye on you at all times.
And now they don't.
Mm-hmm.
And what if they come to get you?
Yeah. So what are the secrets that are hidden in this world, this new suburban area that we're moving to?
Well, I think some of the most, like, if you hit this point in world building, this is a good time to start asking not only like what are the secrets in this location, but kind of like just in general, why do they choose here? There's a million small towns along I-95. Like, what's special about this one? Which is why I chose Pennsylvania, because it's like that's kind of in the You know, I don't know how far I-95 goes. I should know this, but it seems very much kind of like in the middle of that, at least in the East Coast.
Yeah.
And what is special about, is it because somebody lives there that people come here to seek out a certain person who has like specialized knowledge?
Right.
In which case, when you're talking about world building, you should go into like, what does that person's home look like? Did they choose to live like on the outskirts and you have to like really try hard to find them? Or are they right smack dab? Like, are they the mayor? Like, are they, you know, are they like right smack dab in the middle of town? But when you hit like a big question or a big thing, like a big theme, that's when you kind of start to ask these whole new round of questions about the actual location, how it's tied to the theme.
Yeah. In terms of something you said about I-95 and that you should know, this is another point. As world builders, we do a ton of research, like a ton of research. I'm going to call out Banana completely. And I'm going to guess, Banana, that right now you have, 16 tabs open on your browser. How many?
Oh, way more than that.
Yeah. At least 16, and mine are like that too, because I usually have a tab up for like every single piece of thing that I'm researching. So right now I have tabs for certain species of dinosaurs because I'm making a dinosaur game. But research is really important when world building, because the world has to feel real for people to want to play in it. If it feels or reeks of fakeness, it's hard. It's harder anyways. But yeah, what secrets are hidden in this world? That's a great point. And I think another great point to this is where, and we're not getting into characters yet, but where do the players, at what point in the crisis is this game happening? So if we've developed this world where, global conglomerates are putting chips in people to help with healthcare, but are data mining them, are we talking about people that are creating a compound and they all know this? Is this, one rebel person on the edge of town that's signaled out to people saying, I can stop this from happening and we're going to go try to find them? What game are we playing, right? And what secrets are hidden in the world can also be, what secrets do the individual characters know? What secrets are hidden from them that we as the GM knows? Oh, that's a very big part of world building, definitely in like Kids on Bikes and Kids in Space, is we always have those types of columns and notes. What is known by everybody? What is known by some people? What is known only by the GM? Because those secrets are really important to drive the game forward. If you're trying to create intrigue and interest in the game, it's really important. So what other secrets are hidden in our world right now, in this cyber weird world that we're living in? So I liked Clio's suggestion about some guy or person who has some answer in some town, and that may be why we're in this town.
I like to think that maybe it's connected to the city somehow. Like, even though it says it's off the grid, maybe there is something, or...
Right, or
maybe
some
there's a mole.
Trying.
Yeah, there's probably like a mole, or there's some sort of connection. That
there could even be a whole facility, like a whole secret facility, like underground, like underneath town hall.
Right.
Yeah.
Right, and that kind of thing, what you're saying, can build into some, again, historicity. So what I would do with that note of, underground, it's like, I would actually go online and look for statistics of, where's the biggest underground bunker located in America? And that's where I'd set the city. I'd say, that's the city we're going into, because there's historical resonance. There is de facto, a stadium-sized concrete, 6 feet thick concrete walled thing underneath your city. You just don't know about it. And that's
somewhere
where we're
in
going.
Nevada. There's like something in Nevada that's...
Yeah, it sounds very Nevada.
Yeah.
So maybe we're in Nevada. Is that off I-95? I don't know. I'm Canadian.
I
What's your excuse, Clio?
I've never been to Nevada.
I know Route 66 definitely goes through there, so because I can sing the songs. There you go.
So I know we have half an hour left, and we want to leave some space for questions at the end. So we have, let's skip the last slide and let's go into the next 2 slides. So we'll answer the questions, what is the setting? And then who are the players? So starting with the setting, I feel like we're already building this world a little bit in terms of setting. So maybe we could expand on it a little bit more. And then around in 10 minutes, we'll be open for questions and answers.
Excellent. So the questions are, who holds power in this world? And I think we've all already kind of established that maybe governments have fallen or are not as powerful, but the conglomerates, like some tech company, holds a lot of power over the population, because who wants to be diseased? Nobody wants to be diseased. And they've provided us this godlike answer to disease by implanting these chips in us, right? And so that's probably who holds the power.
So
who
like
else could
some
hold
sort
power?
of
The name McCormick got thrown out earlier, so we might as well just go with that.
McCormick.
Isn't that a spice company?
Yes, that's
Like,
why.
they make
And
spices?
they're in London, so we have one of their factories on the east end of London. So that's why I said it.
Starts with spice.
Yeah.
Then you don't know where it's gonna go.
The
And I mean,
spice must flow.
SPICE could be like signal processing integrated computer epidural thing, or I don't know. Could be like subdermal skin thing.
Nice.
What other factions are in place? So I think the faction that Clio mentioned about the guy or person who knows how to stop all this, that's definitely a faction. And then McCormick is obviously a faction. What other factions could there be?
Ooh, so what if we have ex-employees from McCormick that live in this town?
Ooh, I like that.
Or like
They're like almost like whistleblowers.
Yeah, like whistleblowers who were maybe like they were fired, or maybe they were like, told to leave, or something, or they escaped, something like that.
Yeah, because I can think of McCormick as like terminating them, like literally terminating them.
Yeah, absolutely.
Is there room for other factions that are kind of, well, what if there's like a religious faction that doesn't believe in putting these chips in people because of religious reasons, and so they're another faction that's involved. They don't want chips in anybody, whereas these chips are actually useful, but some factions might just not want the data mining or whatever other horrible things happen because of this. I actually think the data mining is the least of the worries. I would say there's probably something else in the game that says this turns you into a techno zombie, where you're actually going to kill people for the company because they can control you at any time. In terms of body horror, because a lot of body horror, that's a little different than body horror, because like psychological horror of being out of control is very different viscerally than body horror, which is literally viscerally. So anyway, another faction could be that religious faction that wants to de-chip everybody.
I just thought of also, like, if there's one religious faction, sometimes it's fun to play with another one as well that's kind of opposed to them, or there's some tension there. And I immediately thought of like the Children of Adam from the Fallout universe.
Yeah,
where it's like they worship Adam. And so what if there is a sect that like really they think that there's a divine component to this technology and these enhancements. Yeah.
They believe in the chip.
Yeah.
Trust the chip. Believe in chip. Follow the chip.
Awesome.
Obey the chip.
So we're getting close to the question of how are they all related to each other. So maybe we could talk about that a little bit more since we're talking about it anyway.
Yeah, so I mean, at a high level, what you want to create when you're building worlds is those relationships within these factions, so that your characters, when they figure out who they're aligned to and who their character would trust more, they also therefore kind of de facto inherit those relationships as well. So the two religious factions that we're talking about, the chippers and the non-chippers, that sounds really weird, but they would probably be diametrically opposed, right? But they're not necessarily diametrically opposed to the other factions like McCormick or the ex-scientists, right? So there's this really neat thing. And if you played Magic the Gathering and you've seen like the 5 points and you know that, okay, these two colors that are next to my colors are more likely my allies, and these two colors that are here that are diametrically opposed to me, or not diametrically, but opposed to me in some way, are more likely not my allies. That's sort of what we're trying to set up here in terms of a relationship pattern, right? So you know kind of who your enemies are. But playing the game will actually tell you, are they really my enemies? Or can they help me or something, right? So relationships are important.
Yeah. And I think especially with factions, it's really like the questions you want to be asking are like, not only like why are they in disagreement with each other potentially, but like is there a resource one of them has that the other one wants or that they're both vying for? And also, where are they aligned? what would it take for them to create an alliance, and then what do you have to do to make that whatever that event is happen?
Right, because if we are coming from this assumption eventually, like as characters perhaps, that McCormick is the big bad, but what happens if it's actually somebody else and we need to ally a couple people? We don't have enough power as this one faction, we need 2 or 3 factions. That's great.
Yeah, and I think it's interesting to touch on like their motivations as well, maybe not as individual characters, but like what are the motivations behind these groups, and then diving into the motivations of the individuals that are within these groups. So with that, we also talked about belief systems. I guess that sort of answered that question.
Yeah.
And we're running out of time, so I'm going to skip down to the next slide. And Desiree, thank you. The next slide is who are the players? So who are they going to be working with? Or maybe do they work with all the factions? Maybe, maybe they're like sort of outcasts or like shadow runners where they can just like work with whoever they want. Or maybe they are aligned with like a certain faction.
Yeah, I mean, I guess it depends. Like, so in world creating and game creating, like who the players are really defines a lot of things. So, like murder hoboism is not necessarily where this is, I think, getting towards. This seems like normal people. But how are they related to each other? What kind of skill sets do they have that could be useful? Did you guys see the TV show Jericho? Do you remember Jericho?
I watched some of it. That was a while ago.
Yeah, it was like 90s. But that reminds me of this in the terms of this just normal people fighting against something. And how in terms of character creation and like move sets or powers or abilities, how does that work into a game where it's like everybody's in the same situation as you, and why are these specific people in this, like doing this adventure or playing this game, these characters? So who are their allies and enemies? These are the questions that you have to answer. Maybe part of character creation, which is part of world building when you think about it, is picking why did you come to this town? Which faction are you there for? Are you a corporate spy for McCormick? Are you, a chipper who just wants to be free from the tethers of McCormick and worship the chip in the way that it's supposed to be worshipped? What is this all about? And that whole idea of the relationship grid can help you figure out who your allies and enemies are as well. What do you think, Clio?
Yeah, I think, because I think it's also very tempting to, because character class, or whatever your equivalent in whatever system you're working in, the equivalent to class, and that is going to be a big part of world building, actually, because it's kind of saying what's important about where do people get their abilities from, basically, whatever moves that they have, what's granting them those moves. Is it their job? Do they have specialized training? Are we saying that there's a potential for military history, and so that's where somebody gets their combat training? Or like, is this person the medic because they're a doctor? Is it job based, or is it going to be something else? Are you working from a different set of archetypes there? So like, is it based off personality and your powers and moves and things, the actions you can take? Are they not as skilled based in the way that you would think from like a profession? Is it something about your motivation? Like, are you being powered by a certain set of motives? Like, I really want revenge. That is a core part of this character type, and therefore my moves are revenge based. Or I'm really nurturing and I want to just take care of these people who are like suffering around me, and so my moves are going to be based on trying to reach out and heal them and take care of them. That's one of the, if not like the first kind of really important question you want to start asking, I think, when you get to this point of where world building and character creation collide.
Very cool. So it looks like we're almost out of time for the world building section. Do we have any last thoughts before we move into Q&A?
No, this was awesome. This is fun. I like world building.
Yeah, me too.
Yeah.
Awesome. So Desiree, are you okay with feeding us some questions?
Yeah, let me see what questions we have. So let's see here. I wrote some down while you all were talking. So what are your favorite evocative questions for players? Was a first question we had a while back.
Ooh, that's a good one.
Ooh, yeah.
So I'll dive in again first here, but I think a lot of the time when you start talking about world building, a lot of the focus is on visual aspects. And like that's the main sense that gets kind of called into play, but focusing on other things like what does it smell like here? And why does it smell like that? Or what do you hear that you wouldn't expect to hear like in this place? Because that can also lead you to like what is the secret of this place? Because if you're hearing buzzing out in the middle of nature, that's not right. And that could tell you something about what else is in that world. So asking questions that call into like even like, does the air taste weird here? Why is that? Just engaging all of the possible senses, including like potentially like a sixth sense, in order to kind of flesh out the world a little bit more. It's always fun for me, at least.
Yeah, I actually keep a grid with me when I'm GMing or world building where it has like the senses, and I tick them off as I do them, just so I don't forget things like smell, because I always do, right? And the world is a much richer place when all of the senses are engaged. So that's a great point.
For me,
Other questions? Go ahead.
Yeah, for me, I also enjoy introducing the element of time with like, creating your world. So I think something that's interesting for me is when GMs ask, what is a routine thing that happens in this world? So is it like, every other day or every, 4 days, this one thing happens? And like it's become so routine for all the people that live in this town, but it's not routine for newcomers or players that are just being introduced into this world. I think it sort of gives it this like weird creepy quality to it.
Yeah,
that's
it's
a very
sorry,
question.
Son, you had some questions.
No,
Yeah.
I don't have much more. We can move on to the next question.
Okay. So before the question, there was a suggestion. I know you were talking about podcasts, so someone had recommended Bubble. They said it's a modern sci-fi setting, and it's a podcast. So just as a suggestion to check out. But what do your session zeros look like?
Oh, that's a good question. So session 0 for me usually starts off with lines and veils, really to delineate what we are going to talk about and what we aren't going to talk about in the game session. So a line is something that's like hard, like we're not going to do that. That's a line we don't cross, and if we do, we call each other out on it. And a veil is something that is like fade to black, like that exists in the world. We're not going to ignore the fact that it exists, but we are not going to necessarily glorify it or talk about it at any extended length of time, right? So something like a hard line for many of the players I play with might be like sexual violence. We just don't have it in the game. Whereas a veil might be something like a,
like action movie violence.
Yeah, action movie violence, where it's like we just fade to black, or even just like consensual sex. We don't want to necessarily role play it, but we're just going to say, yeah, these two people have sex, fade to black, bam, done. So there's that kind of stuff that we talk about. And then session 0 for me is usually a lot of world building and character building, where people are picking their playbooks or character class or whatever you want to call it. And then we feed that into the world that they are playing in. And then we talk about what they want to do. I do this thing called Wishes and Stars a lot, where we talk about what is one thing that, or two things, where we give awards away to people like stars. We give stars away. What was the most impactful thing that happened in this session? And then wishes are like, what do you want to happen next session? So I live by 3 rules when I GM, and my 3 rules are literally this. The first is the players, the second is the story, and the third is the rules. That's it. The rules are the least important thing to me. The players are the most important thing to me, and the story is what ties them both together. So my job is to make sure the players have the most fun they can by keeping the narrative kind of on track, using the rules to do that when necessary. That's it. So my session zeros are outlining all of that.
Clio, what are your session zeros like?
So one thing that I do, and it's always going to depend on the system, right? But when I play or when I run Kids on Bikes, what I like to do is there's a list of like, here are the different establishments or location features that you're going to find in this town. And I'd like to have everybody go around and put them on the map so that we know what's in the town, but how are they related to each other? What's
awesome.
close to what? And so we'll say like, okay, this is Main Street, and then what's off of that? And I'll pass the map drawing again. Like, it doesn't have to be good. Like, you just have to be able to like draw a box and write the thing in the middle of it, or have somebody else do it for you. And I'll just pass that around, or have somebody who is like the cartographer who's taking suggestions from people, and just say, okay, like the video store is here. And let's say it's like,
that is so 90s.
Yeah, and like I love video stores.
The Blockbuster's over here.
I love video stores. And like maybe that's also like where, like, when somebody asks like, where did the bad kids, like the bad delinquent kids hang out, like we'll say, oh, it's like in the parking lot of the video store. And so we'll put like a circle near and be like, this is like bad kid hangout video parking lot. But having everybody kind of, because location and where things are in relation to each other, like if the school's out in the middle of nowhere, you can play a lot with the journey to and from school, because a lot could happen there. It can be creepy if you're going for like a creepy vibe, when it's a bad place for a confrontation because if maybe no one is around, and that again is going to get players really involved. And that's I think that is, for me, like one of the most important parts of doing a session 0 for Kids on Bikes is establishing that map and letting people kind of not only figure out where the establishments all are, but where the more abstract things, like where did the so-and-so people like hang out, where did you have like this one terrible incident happen.
Hey Clio, is that part of the rule set, or is that just something you do?
That's
I haven't
just
read Kids
something
on Bike
I do.
in a long time.
I don't
Maybe
think
it should be part of the rule set.
Maybe it should be. I mean, I always do that.
It's awesome. It's great. I love it. Because those frames of reference that we give people become the living and breathing parts of the game, right? Like they go, I don't want to go to the video store because the bad kids hang out there. But what if they're not there? There's a chance they're there. They don't like me, right? Because I'm the tech nerd, so no. It's interesting.
Yeah.
What do you do, Banana?
Feeding off of that, there's actually this thing that a while ago we were playing the session of Monster Hearts. It was sort of like a mini campaign. And something that the GM did, this is John Stavropoulos, he did this amazing thing where you just like did seating charts, but it was so in depth. So you would have one character describe where they're seated in Monster Hearts is basically like a teenage drama. Think like Buffy or Veronica Mars, but like with monsters. Yeah, exactly. And so you have the seating chart. Where are you seated? Where is, someone that you don't like seated? And where is like, this other person that's your friend seated? And I think like the way that it's set up is interesting because you can also see like...
Was this in the cafeteria or in a classroom?
Oh, sorry, in a classroom. So this is a classroom seating. And based on that, like who talks the most to one another, who passes notes, who texts one another, that kind of thing, who gets picked on by the teacher. I think those little nuggets of information are just really great and really make the game. So I think we're ready for another question.
Okay.
Yeah.
So let's see. We have you used an X card? I'm trying to be more accommodating as I've been doing some one-shots with people I haven't met before.
Yes.
In
fact, we just mentioned John Stavropoulos, who invented the X card, and I love dearly.
Yes.
But yeah, there's a whole lot of different safety tools out there. I always use the X card, which in case for anybody who is not familiar, usually it's like an index card with just a big X drawn on it. And the way that it works is that if some content comes up during play that you don't want to touch on, you just don't want it to be in the game because it's going to make it uncomfortable and unpleasant for you, or you just don't want it, you just reach out, you touch the X card, like that.
Damn.
And you rewind the game a little bit. Everybody, there's no questions asked. You just rewind the game a little bit, steer around whatever content just came up, and continue playing the game as if it never came up. And it's important not to like kind of push back on it and be like, why don't you want this content? And then Sen, you mentioned Lions and Veils, which I also like for certain. Again, like different games will be better suited for different safety mechanics. And I also, one thing that I personally do is it's kind of a mix between X card and Lions and Veils. I call it preemptive X card, which is that I'll create a list of here are some topics that are, fairly likely more likely than others perhaps to come up during this game that are sensitive. I pass it out to all the players and I say, just cross out whatever you just don't want to play on. Hand it back to me, no name written on it, it's just anonymous. I scramble them all up. I look at what's been crossed out. I make a master list of what we're not going to be touching on that has more likelihood of potentially coming up. And that just is made available to all the players so the whole table can see what we are not going to be touching on.
As you guys might have noticed, I do have like a stack of index cards next to me at all times. And all I do with that is when I'm GMing is I will write down what people say are hard lines in red. And then I will fold up a tent and I'll put it in front of me facing them and facing me as well. I write it on both sides so that I know and they know this is not to be crossed. And then the same thing with veils and whatever, right? So I do that a lot. I actually have a laminated sheet of paper that I created just to remind me to do this stuff. Because I always forget. Not I always forget, but I need to be reminded sometimes because I think things are cool. I think this is cool, but somebody else might not. And I got to remember that, right? It takes an active, thoughtful GMing process to make sure that we're not traumatizing people and that we are playing in a way that everybody is going to end up having fun, right?
Yeah, exactly. And I think we talked about this a little bit on the panel yesterday, but to sort of make everyone feel comfortable with using an X card, sometimes people like to employ the workshop technique where, and if anyone here wants to, work with me here and like say something that's, or X card me, I could say something like, I hate breakfast. Now I'm allowing any of you to like X card me. We're just going to do this quick workshop thing.
Yeah. X carded you.
Okay.
One quick note though, because we're in a digital world now, and you're not gonna be able to touch an X card like on the table the way you would. X arms is a great alternative for that, where you just hold up your arms instead.
Smart.
It's what we do in LARP also a lot of the time. So now it translates well to Zoom and other video.
Thank you, Clio. I keep forgetting that. So let's do that again. So I'm going to say I hate breakfast. Breakfast is terrible. So Sen has X'd arms at me. So I'm going to say, thank you, Sen. I'm going to go back, rewind, and I'm going to say something else. You know what? Breakfast is okay for some people. I personally don't like it, but for other people, it's great. So that's like a quick sort of intro to get everyone onboarded with the X card. So that way, later on when they want to start using it, when they start playing the game, they'll feel more comfortable, using it instead of feeling like it's a taboo thing to do.
Yeah. For lines and veils, I'm usually the first one to say, this is a hard line for me, and this is a veil for me. And I just write them down and put them up. And then people feel, oh, yeah, animal violence, definitely a hard line for me. And, I'm okay with this, but I'd really rather not talk about blood. I understand violence is going to happen in this game, but let's not describe how much blood is splurting out of anybody. By leading by example, by being a model for the players, that's how we can have a good session 0 startup for X carding and lines and veils. And remember that this can change from session to session. Just because if you have a campaign and you did it in session 1 doesn't mean that it's going to stay static for the whole campaign, because some people have campaigns that last for years, and if you don't know the personal life super well, you don't know what you don't know. And so maybe every now and then check in and say, hey, are there any new things that we need to add to the lines and veils or whatever type of list you're using?
Yeah, that's a great point.
Awesome. Well, it looks like that was actually the last question we had.
Cool.
Great. Well, thank you everyone for doing this workshop with me. And thank you so much, Desiree, for going through all the slides and managing all the tech and everything.
Keeping us in line.
Yeah, keeping our time check and everything. Thank you, Clio. Thank you, Sen. Do we want to do like a quick outro before we leave? And where you can find us on social media, Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, whatever you use. So Clio, let's start with you.
Yeah, you can find me online pretty much anywhere at CYS Davis. So Twitter, Instagram, Patreon, all that. Yeah.
Cool. You can find me at Sen-Foong Lim on Twitter. And if you're interested in mostly board game design stuff, I co-host a weekly webcast called The Meeple Syrup Show, which is available on Facebook Live. So if you go to Facebook and just look for Meeple Syrup, like maple syrup because I'm Canadian, but Meeple Syrup because I'm a gamer.
Banana
There
and
you
I
go.
were just on that.
Yeah,
we
it was awesome.
were.
It was fun.
We just finished our Kickstarter for Battle of the Boy Bands, so that's something that I'm very excited for. And you can find me at Banana Chan Games on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. So thank you everyone for watching. Bye.
Thanks.